Ever get the feeling that even the biggest names in Hollywood, even legends like Alfred Hitchcock, had to make compromises? Like there were things even he couldn't get made.
It happens more than you might think.
Really?
Yeah, especially back in Hollywood's golden age. The studio executives, they had a lot of power.
I bet.
Yeah, they really shaped the films even more than the director sometimes.
Wow. So we're talking like Michelangelo being told how to sculpt.
Exactly.
Today we're going to deep dive into that side of Hitchcock.
Oh, yeah.
5 films he really wanted to make.
Wow.
That never made it to the screen.
Fascinating.
Intriguing plots, creative clashes, and a real glimpse into how the studios even controlled a master like Hitchcock.
Yeah.
And to help us unlock the secrets of these unmade masterpieces, we've got a Hitchcock expert with us today.
It's true. By the 1960s, Hitchcock was at the peak of his career.
Okay.
Major shareholder at Universal. His films were box office hits. His name practically guaranteed success.
And why couldn't he get these films made?
Well, there was still some stories he couldn't tell.
It's hard to imagine. These weren't just, any films, were they?
No, these were personal for Hitchcock. And to really understand why they never saw the light of day, we need to understand the dynamics of Hollywood at the time.
I see.
Especially the influence of a man named Lew Wasserman.
Wasserman, Hitchcock's longtime friend and agent.
Right.
Who eventually became the head of Universal.
That's right.
The sources we looked at paint him as a fascinating character.
Oh, yeah.
A powerful Hollywood player.
Absolutely.
But also a figure with some ties to organized crime.
Yeah, it's a complicated picture.
So how did that impact his relationship with Hitchcock?
Well, on the one hand, Wasserman was a champion for Hitchcock, helping him secure creative control and financial success.
Right.
But on the other hand, he was also a shrewd businessman.
I bet.
And some argue maybe even a bit risk-averse because of his past. This made him really wary of any projects that might damage Hitchcock's image or Universal's bottom line.
So did Wasserman stifle Hitchcock's creativity or protect his legacy? It's a good question. Let's look at the films themselves and see if we can find an answer.
Okay.
First up, The Three Hostages, a planned sequel to The 39 Steps.
From the 1930s.
Yeah.
Hitchcock loved that source novel for The Three Hostages. But he felt some elements, like the use of hypnotism, wouldn't really resonate with a modern audience.
So that one was more creative differences than studio pressure.
Yeah, it seems that way. He was known for his meticulous approach.
Right.
He wanted every detail to feel right.
So if hypnotism in a thriller was a no-go for Hitchcock,
yeah,
what kind of story did he catch his eye but never made it past those studio heads?
Well, there's RRR.
RRR.
Yeah, it's an unusual title,
Right.
But it actually refers to the highest rating for collector coins.
Oh, wow.
It was inspired by Italian neorealist cinema and would have been a very visually driven film.
Interesting.
About a family running a crime ring out of their hotel. Hitchcock planned to cleverly weave this coin rating system into the plot.
Really?
Yeah, making it both a thematic and a visual motif.
That's clever.
Yeah.
That sounds like a pretty big departure from the Hitchcock we know and love.
It does a bit.
Was this the too edgy project that Wasserman shut down?
It's likely. You have to remember that studios, especially back then, were
Right.
very protective of their stars' images.
Of course.
They wanted Hitchcock to stick to what he was known for. Suspense thrills the master of suspense. This film, with its focus on realism and maybe even a more ambiguous morality, might have felt too risky for the brand they had so carefully cultivated.
That makes sense. Speaking of risks, our next Unmade film has a title that sends chills down my spine. Mary Rose.
This one was a true passion project for Hitchcock.
Oh.
Yeah, a ghost story about a woman who disappears on an island and then reappears decades later unchanged.
Wow.
He tried to make it for decades.
Really?
Yeah, with actresses like Grace Kelly attached at various points.
Oh, wow.
But studios consistently rejected it. They found it too eerie and uncommercial.
Decades is a long time to hold on to an idea.
It is.
It must have really resonated with him. Why do you think he was so drawn to this particular story? What about it was so compelling for Hitchcock?
It's fascinating, isn't it? Mary Rose deals with these themes of lost time, identity, all recurring elements in Hitchcock's work.
Yeah.
Maybe he saw something of himself in this story in the woman who returns seemingly untouched by time while the world around her has moved on.
It makes you wonder what he would have done with those themes visually.
Yeah.
You mentioned Grace Kelly.
Yeah.
Imagine her ethereal beauty in a ghostly setting.
It would have been something else.
But sadly, Universal went so far as to actually forbid him from making Mary Rose.
Yeah, contractually forbade him.
It's almost unbelievable considering his stature.
It is.
But it really highlights the power dynamics at play in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Even a director like Hitchcock couldn't escape the studio system's control.
It's true.
Okay, those stories weren't enough. Let's delve into a truly dark chapter, Kaleidoscope.
This one was intended as a prequel to Shadow of a Doubt, exploring the origins of the murderous Uncle Charlie character.
Wow.
Kaleidoscope was a film that pushed boundaries
Okay.
in a way that few directors, even Hitchcock, dared to do at the time. It was envisioned as this gritty, visually innovative film that explored the dark underbelly of human nature.
I see.
It would have contained graphic violence and nudity elements that were taboo in the 1960s.
So this wasn't just about straying from a brand.
No.
This was pushing the limits of what was acceptable on screen at the time.
Right.
You have to wonder, was Hitchcock trying to make a statement? Was this his rebellion against the studio system?
It's possible. He always had a subversive streak.
He did.
But even Hitchcock acknowledged that Kaleidoscope would be intense,
Yeah.
potentially alienating audiences.
Right.
Perhaps he saw it as a way to evolve his art, to explore darker themes, experiment with new techniques.
Right. Yeah. And the studios. What was their reaction to this potentially controversial project?
Universal ultimately shut down production.
Oh, wow.
They feared it was simply too extreme for audiences.
Really?
Yeah, and could tarnish Hitchcock's reputation. What's tantalizing is that some test footage exists shot in New York City.
Really?
Yeah. It offers a glimpse into what could have been a visual style unlike anything Hitchcock had done before.
I'd love to get my hands on that footage. It's a shame this film was never made,
It is.
especially with how groundbreaking it could have been.
Mm-hmm.
But if Kaleidoscope was a step too far, what about The Birds? That one made it to the screen, didn't it?
It did, but here's where things get truly interesting.
Okay.
Originally, The Birds wasn't about birds at all.
Wait, what? What were those feathered fiends originally supposed to be?
Before those iconic boat attacks, The Birds was conceived as an alien invasion film.
Hold on. So those terrifying flocks could have been extraterrestrials.
Exactly.
This is blowing my mind.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. Why did Hitchcock shift from aliens to birds?
That's still debated. Perhaps he felt more comfortable with the avian threat, or maybe the studios had a hand in the decision,
Right.
Steering him towards a more familiar genre.
It makes you wonder what that version of the film would look like.
I know.
Would it have been as effective? Would it have become the classic we know today?
That's a question we'll never know the answer to.
It is a shame.
It is. But it does highlight an important point. Sometimes the greatest works of art are those that remain unrealized, leaving us to imagine the possibilities.
Well, this has certainly given me a lot to think about.
And this is just the beginning. In
Yeah.
part 2, we'll delve deeper into these films,
Okay.
analyzing their potential impact, exploring the themes Hitchcock was drawn to,
Sounds good.
and considering how these unrealized projects might have changed our understanding of his legacy.
I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.
We're back. And I gotta say, my mind is still reeling from that alien invasion birds.
I know, right? It's wild.
Makes me wonder if Hitchcock was always fascinated by those themes of the uncanny and the unexplainable,
Yeah.
even in his more traditional films.
Yeah, that's a great observation. And it's worth noting that even The Birds,
Right.
with the avian threat, it still tapped into those anxieties of the unknown.
It did.
Yeah.
But let's shift our focus back to those power dynamics of Hollywood in Hitchcock's era,
Okay.
particularly Lew Wasserman's role.
Yeah.
We know he had these ties to organized crime, which is fascinating in itself.
It is.
But how might that have influenced his decisions regarding Hitchcock's films?
That's a good question.
It's not every day you have a studio head with a past like that.
No, you don't.
Did Wasserman's connections make him more risk-averse?
It's possible.
Did he see Hitchcock's darker films as potential liabilities?
Maybe. Something that could attract unwanted attention.
Right. So perhaps Wasserman wasn't just protecting the studio's bottom line.
Yeah.
He was also protecting himself and his associates.
Could be. It puts a whole new spin on the idea of studio interference, doesn't it?
It does. And it makes you wonder if Hitchcock, who was known for his sly wit and dark humor, ever suspected the true extent of Wasserman's influence.
That's a great point.
Maybe he got a hint of it when Wasserman shut down Mary Rose.
It's possible.
That ghost story seemed to be a personal obsession for Hitchcock.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you bring up Mary Rose now.
Yeah.
Because it seems to be the antithesis of Kaleidoscope.
Really?
Yeah, one is this ghostly tale dealing with loss and the passage of time, while the other delves into the darkness of the human psyche.
Right. Yet both films were rejected,
I know.
each for seemingly different reasons.
It's true.
What do you think this tells us about these studio systems' control over Hitchcock's creativity? Was there a pattern to the projects they greenlit and the ones they rejected?
It seems they were comfortable with Hitchcock exploring suspense and thrills,
Right.
but only within certain boundaries.
Right.
Films like Psycho and North by Northwest were successful.
Of course.
Because they pushed the envelope, but they didn't completely shatter it.
Right.
But Mary Rose, with its supernatural elements, might have been seen as too far removed from Hitchcock's established brand. It was too eerie, too unsettling, perhaps even too feminine for the image they wanted to maintain.
That's a really interesting point. Mary Rose does seem to have a more feminine sensibility.
It does.
Focusing on the emotional and psychological experiences of a woman.
Right.
Do you think this played a role in its rejection, especially in the male-dominated world of 1960s Hollywood?
It's certainly a possibility. Studios were, and to some extent still are, very image conscious. They cater to what they perceive as the audience's expectations.
Of course.
And back then, the perception of a female-driven narrative, especially one with a supernatural bent, might not have fit the mold of a commercially viable Hitchcock film.
No. It's a shame because, as we discussed earlier, that recurring theme of a lost woman returning unchanged really speaks to Hitchcock's fascination with time and identity.
It does.
Do you think this theme resonates with any of his existing films?
Absolutely. Look at Vertigo, for example.
Okay.
The obsession with a lost love, the attempts to recreate her, it echoes those same anxieties about time and the fleeting nature of identity.
I see.
Perhaps Mary Rose was his way of exploring those themes in a more overt, more fantastical way.
It's like we're seeing the pieces of a puzzle, but some of the pieces are missing.
Right.
We can only imagine what those missing pieces, those unmade films, would have revealed about Hitchcock's creative vision.
It's true.
Do you think these unrealized projects cast a shadow over his existing filmography?
It's more about adding depth and complexity, I think.
Okay.
Knowing that these films existed, that Hitchcock yearned to tell these stories, it gives us a fuller picture of him as an artist. It reminds us that even the most celebrated directors face limitations. That their creative journeys are filled with detours and roadblocks.
And sometimes those roadblocks lead to unexpected masterpieces.
Exactly.
Like The Birds, evolving from an alien invasion to a story of avian terror.
It's amazing.
It makes you wonder if those studio interventions, as frustrating as they must have been for Hitchcock, actually pushed him to be more innovative.
I think so.
To find creative solutions within those constraints.
That's a brilliant insight. Constraint can often be the mother of invention. Maybe those limitations, those no's from the studio, forced Hitchcock to tap into a different part of his creative mind, leading to the iconic films we know and love today.
So maybe Wasserman, even with his questionable connections, wasn't entirely a villain in this story.
It's possible.
He might have inadvertently helped shape Hitchcock's legacy by guiding him, sometimes forcefully, toward projects that aligned with both their interests.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? The line between creative freedom and studio control is often blurry. And the impact can be both positive and negative.
Right. It's a conversation that continues to this day in Hollywood and beyond.
Absolutely.
And what about Hitchcock himself? Do you think he ever felt resentment towards Wasserman or the studio system for holding him back? Or did he ultimately accept those limitations as part of the game?
That's a question we can only speculate about. But I think it's safe to say that Hitchcock was a pragmatist. He understood the realities of Hollywood, but those unmade films, those stories he couldn't tell, they likely remained with him, haunting his thoughts, perhaps even influencing his later work in subtle ways.
I love that idea that those unrealized visions continued to echo throughout his career.
I do too.
It's like they became part of his creative DNA.
Precisely. And that's why it's so rewarding to explore these unmade films. They offer a glimpse into the hidden corners of an artist's mind, the paths not taken, the dreams deferred. These remind us that even the most celebrated figures have their regrets, their what-ifs.
Well, I'm certainly starting to see Hitchcock in a new light, not just as a master of suspense,
Yeah.
but as a complex artist wrestling with his own ambitions and the limitations of his time.
Exactly.
I can't wait to hear your final thoughts on this in part 3.
I'm happy to share them.
We've spent this deep dive exploring the shadows of Alfred Hitchcock's career. These films that never saw the light of day.
Right.
And it's really given me a whole new perspective on the man and his work.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
These unrealized projects, they really reveal so much about his ambitions, his willingness to push boundaries and the forces that really shaped his choices.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Looking back at these 5 unmade films, is there one that stands out to you as the biggest what if? The one that you wish had made it to the screen?
It's a tough choice, but I think I'd have to go with Kaleidoscope.
Kaleidoscope.
Yeah. The idea of a Hitchcock film exploring those darker impulses, using these innovative visual techniques.
Right.
It's so tantalizing.
It is. It could have been a masterpiece or a spectacular failure.
Yeah.
But either way, it would have been a bold statement.
Absolutely.
And the fact that some test footage exists just adds to the mystery.
It does.
It's like a lost chapter in film history.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, if those studio executives in their attempt to protect Hitchcock's image and their own profits might have inadvertently stifled a creative evolution.
What if Kaleidoscope had been made? Would it have changed the trajectory of Hitchcock's career?
Right. Would it have paved the way for other filmmakers to explore those darker themes?
It's a question we can only ponder. But I do think it's important to acknowledge that even without Kaleidoscope, Hitchcock's influence on cinema is undeniable.
Oh, absolutely.
He mastered the art of suspense, created iconic imagery, and left behind a body of work that continues to captivate audiences today.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes these unmade films so compelling. They don't diminish his legacy, they enhance it.
Yeah.
They show us that even a master like Hitchcock had unfulfilled dreams,
Right.
Ideas that never reach their full potential.
It humanizes him.
It does.
It reminds us that even the greatest artists face limitations, both internal and external.
It's true.
And it makes you appreciate the films he did make even more, knowing the sacrifices and compromises that went into their creation.
Exactly. Every film, every work of art is a result of countless choices, both conscious and unconscious.
Yeah.
And those choices are often shaped by forces beyond the artist's control.
So if we're looking at the bigger picture here, what do these unmade films tell us about the creative process in general?
They remind us that the journey is just as important as the destination, that the detours, the roadblocks, the unrealized dreams, they all contribute to the final product, even if it's not the product we originally envisioned.
It's about embracing the unexpected,
the
unplanned twists and turns that life throws our way.
Exactly.
And perhaps in those unexpected moments, we discover something new, something even more profound than what we initially set out to create.
Beautifully said. And I think that's a valuable lesson, not just for artists, but for anyone navigating the complexities of life.
This has been a truly enlightening deep dive. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure. I always enjoy exploring the hidden corners of film history, especially with such a curious and insightful host.
And thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of unmade Hitchcock films.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed it. Remember, sometimes the most captivating stories are the ones left untold.
It's true.
So the next time you watch a Hitchcock classic, take a moment to consider the films that never were.
I will.
You might just discover a whole new level of appreciation for the master of suspense.
You might.
And if you want to keep exploring the fascinating world of film history with us, don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive.
Yes, please subscribe.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a different corner of the cinematic universe.
Ooh.
Until then, keep watching, keep thinking, and keep those reels rolling.